Okay, we're ready to take questions. Anyone? Questions to start? Thank you.
Bernie Goldstein, University of Pittsburgh. A question about the moral values that were described, particularly solidarity and the common good. Most of the other moral values, sustainability, others, multi-generational, intergenerational equity, are sort of reinforcing, and at least there's an attempt at defining them. Solidarity and the common good seems to be something that is, in many societies, including certainly this one, defined as much by advertising managers and politicians as there being any sort of common thing that one can really get at. How do you define that? How do you make sure that what you're looking at is something that has been agreed to as a common good by the by, if you will, metric of what people really believe in, or have some sort of external validity rather than just simply something that's been manipulated?
Thank you. Dr. Bush, would you like to address that?
I'd love to. Thank you very much for that question. Again, very challenging. And I do agree in the other values we could fall back on a lot of literature. Not with solidarity and the common good. Let me say first that we do not have, or we did not propose a definition of the common good. We did propose a definition of what we understand solidarity in this context to be. I mean, solidarity is a term that has a very patent history and has been used in many areas for many different things. And I do agree with you. It's become a bit of a go-to word for all kinds of things, in particular when cuts are imposed, as they are currently in the UK. They are often proposed, public cuts are often proposed, going back to the nature of solidarity, that we owe each other assistance, and we all have to tighten our belts because we are in this together. While this may by many be seen quite cynical, this notion of being in it together, of sharing a common fate, is one of the elements of what we define to be solidary behavior between states. It's very rare to define solidarity between states, and not very many have attempted it. And of course, we didn't write a philosophical treatise. We tried to be very oriented towards practice. But we did take this notion on board, that we actually share the issue of climate change. This is something that we can already see many countries will be affected by, or are already being affected. I mean, just think back at Sandy and things like that. And all across Europe, we have areas that are already being affected. And of course, in the developing world, we see that this is something that in many different guises is a problem that we share as a world community. And so this notion of sharing one problem is part of the definition. And the other part of the definition is that because we share this problem, there's an obligation to help each other dealing with it. That is sort of the ethical, idealistic backdrop of the definition. It means that, as we put it in the report, there needs to be special focus on the most vulnerable members of the world society to be protected from the problems, from this common problem. So in terms of more specific recommendations, we say that from this understanding of solidarity, which includes an appeal to the common good that we did not define, because that was just too big for us, we derive the recommendation that what we need to focus on first is to protect the weakest members. And that means the weakest populations in developing countries by, for example, looking at fluctuations in food prices that really affect the poorest, of course, most, or looking at land grabs, as we've just heard. I know that's not a satisfactory answer for a philosopher, if you happen to be one, but I hope it goes a little way to show how we try to go from a very abstract concepts to something more practical.
Thank you very much. We'll go to this side of the room now.
Thank you. Luz Claudio, Mount Sinai School of Medicine. I'm a member on the roundtable. I wanted to ask about, first, great presentations, both of them, really, really fantastic. I wanted to ask about the siting process for the plants and whether they have to submit environmental impact statements that maybe have to include community comments and things like that in the beginning. I think that may be part of the of what you have observed. So if you wanted to comment on that area.
Okay. Yeah, actually, let's see. I'm not so sure about the environmental impact statement, although we did ask about if there were community meetings at the, before the plant was going to be sited, and we heard a variety of things. Sometimes, there were 6 communities, so they were all a little bit different. Sometimes the people who were organizing them said, yeah, we had them, but no one came, or, so I say in general that I think what happened, which maybe we've seen now with some of the hydrofracking as well, is after the plant came in and then they saw some of the impacts, particularly one of the communities, there had been a couple of years of drought in Kansas, and the community was put on water restrictions for, household water restrictions for outside watering. And then they were saying, well, if we had any idea that the plant was going to use this much water, well, of course we would have, not wanted it in our community. So I think it was more a case of sometimes there were meetings, but not always. But there was a sense that, they did not feel that well informed. And I just want to point out one other thing, which I didn't talk about, but in both Kansas and Iowa, I actually did a study looking at how many times they had received environmental violations, the plants, not just the ones we were studying, but in general. And it was pretty interesting. I wouldn't say a majority, but probably about half the plants in both states had received water and air pollution violations. So that one of the reasons I was interested in that is because the community perception was that it was a very clean plant. There were no, environmental externalities, environmental impacts, and then to come to find out that actually there were quite a few citations. So then it made me wonder, well, I guess it just doesn't get into the public discourse or the media that, the plant was cited for, improper permitting or, excess effluents. So anyway, that was interesting. So there were some citations that happened. There was some information, but I think people in general were not that well informed.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Interesting. Thank you. Yes, sir?
Yes, Carlos Santos Burgoa from the Pan American Health Organization. I really want to congratulate the 2 speakers. I think we have had excellent presentations, and thank you for bringing Latin American examples into this discussion, because we do need to realize that we are in a common world. And thank you for that. On the ethical side, well, I wanted to say something in relation to your presentation in Colombia. While you were presenting,
sorry, could you speak up just a little? It's incredibly hard to hear from here.
Okay, I will try to speak harder.
Thank you.
In relation to your Colombia presentation, I was thinking that 100 years ago, the Mexican Revolution started precisely around sugarcane plantations. And that was the second round of the Mexican Revolution. And it was and the huge land reform that came after that was a critical part of the Mexican history. So it's interesting that the history of sugarcane is being repeated from the historical, social, and economical point of view. And it might be useful to review the processes that led into that. But my major concern is on one word that I haven't heard in both presentations, and especially in terms of ethics, it's something that I would expect to hear. It's the word of empowerment, people's empowerment. I haven't listen that word at all. And from the human security point of view, you do need the action of the state to protect the people against risks, and such as unsustainable biofuel production. But also, you do need the empowerment of people to act and to know about that and to develop that. And that is also a tool for us to work with the communities in primary healthcare, in many fields, to work with the communities and to empower them to really act in their behalf. Any comment about this for both speakers?
Who should start?
I'm sorry. Sorry, do I start? Sure, I can start. Well, I'm not exactly sure how to respond about the empowerment agenda. I will say that in Colombia, there have been some pretty high-profile strikes of sugarcane workers, and they have actually gotten some, better compensation and some better working conditions relative to what they had before, which are still, not very good. So there has been some, I'd say, groundswell of local organizing, grassroots organizing to improve their conditions there. So anyway, but it's a good comment, I think. I think you're right.
Did you want to add?
I agree, and if I just can point this out, an ethical appraisal of biofuels would indeed be incomplete without taking that on board. So I do apologize that I actually excluded it from my presentation, mainly due to time issues. But in the report, we actually focus to some extent when we discuss implementation of these principles in more detail. We discuss how to work with local communities in a way that not just imposes additional policy on them, but in fact includes them as part of that whole process in a more empowering way. And there are some, so under Principle 5 mainly, there are some good examples that we pinpoint to where small local initiatives, so currently I'm now focusing on developing countries here, where small initiatives, small landholders were aided, but not in a paternalistic way, in setting up local small-scale biofuel productions that actually help bring energy to areas for the very first time, that kind of energy. And it greatly helped improve infrastructure. Mali, there are some very good examples there that we discuss in the report. So I completely take that on board, and I thank you for pointing it out. This is something which we also try to capture in the word having more sophisticated policies and having more flexible policies. I think one of the take-home messages from me is that biofuels are not, there are 1,000 different types and kinds of biofuel production. They are not the same, and they have to be looked at case by case. And in many areas, the problems that we see, we already have policy at hand. We already have the roundtables. We already have the codes, and the problem lies in the implementation. And that is where local populations come in. And that we know from other areas of where we have difficulties to implement policies on the ground, that it works best if all partners, that includes industry on the one side, but also the local populations, need to be really a part of the process. And there need to be consultation processes and participation, real participation. So thank you for that comment.
Thank you. Yes, and we are running over a little here, so we have time for just 2 very quick questions, please. Yes, sir.
Thanks, everyone. Good morning. Jamie Bartram from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm also a member of the Round Table. Thanks for great presentations. They were both really interesting. My questions are rather specific and nowhere near as exciting as the Mexican Revolution and associated imagery. Elena, when you were speaking, there were 2 things that I noted to myself.
One was you made a reference to essential human rights, and I would really like to understand if that was a deliberate allusion to a subset of human rights rather than human rights generally. Secondly, you made a comment on equity, which was very clear and very precise, but then it segued instantly into public-private partnerships, and I wanted to understand if that was a reflection on PPPs as the most effective mechanism towards increasing equity, or whether there had not been analysis comparing them with more traditional mechanisms. Thank you.
Wow, the questions really aren't getting any easier. Very briefly, you would have to talk to the lawyer experts on human rights on our group, so I'm really not an expert in this area. We had a long discussion whether we should include the word essential human rights, because we all agreed that there are some human rights which, if violated, lead to such great harms that their protection must always be prioritized, and that there can never be a trade-off between, for example, greater economic development and, say, taking literally the food from somebody's plate. But that there are also other human rights which might not have the exact same status. And I know that in the legal literature on human rights, this is a big, complex issue, and I cannot really comment on how that debate has developed. We decided on a cluster of essential human rights, which were access to sufficient food, water, protection of health, and the right not to just and fair reward, which is our principle 4, which we also put under the human rights, and the right not to be displaced. So they all sort of reinforce each other, the principles reinforce each other, and this was the group that we felt most strongly about. We did not go beyond that in this report. So I actually see that point and say you pinpointed something that is not clear enough.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I think we'll have to just take that here. We're really running short, but thank you so much. Maybe you can get in touch later. Have the last quick question.
I'd love to.
So, thank you for it. And this might be a very short answer. Jack Spangler, Harvard University, and roundtable member. And again, thank you for providing your report, Elena. And I was looking through it while you were presenting, and I want to ask, I'm curious, is whether your committee considered beyond human rights, that is, nature's rights, and the right to nature to exist in and of itself. And this is in particular to forest land, for example. Was this in your considerations of ethics at all?
Thank you. Yes, we did consider that under the question of whether we actually look at strong environmental sustainability or a rather weak concept of environmental sustainability, and the committee was split. There were some who felt that nature has a right, natural creatures or even plants have a right of their own and value of their own, whereas others felt that they only have rights as far as they can help humans live a better life. So we skirted around that issue, and we did not make we didn't take a strong position because the committee could not agree. Again, this is a big, big debate, and because we wanted to be practical, we had to avoid it. But there is an ethical discussion under Principle 2 and under the moral value in the chapter of in the ethics chapter under the moral value of sustainability, where we take on that problem.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you so much to Anne Sweeney and to our speakers this morning. We're now due to have a break, and in consideration of the webcast, even though we're running a little bit behind, if people could be back here at 20 after 10, and then we can catch up a little bit and get back on schedule for our audience on the web. So we'll see you in a few minutes.
Thank you very much. This was wonderful. Thank you for the great questions.